Good evening, everyone. On behalf of GHMC Bhopal, I, Dr. Vishal Dwivedi, delighted to welcome you all in today's webinar. I will be your coordinator for today's session. Before starting today's session, I would like to introduce one of the eminent speaker, Dr. Matthias Strelow, sir, who will be sharing his knowledge with us today. Dr. Matthias Strelow, sir, has been working as a homeopath since 1992 in his own clinic along with a team of 4 homeopathy in Hamburg. He is a co-founder of the School of Homeopathy in Hamburg in 1997. Since 1997, been a chairperson of the organization with Homeopaths Without Borders Germany, as well as Homeopaths Worldwide. Has treated war victims and trained homeopath in Bosnia, co-author of the book based on the Bosnian experience, the Master Project Homeopathy Between War and Hope. Most recently, initiating a project in Rwanda. International engagements in Europe, Asia, and Africa. Graduated as MSc in Homeopathy in 2011 at UCLan in Great Britain. Registered therapist, lecturer, and supervisor. Publications in several homeopathic magazines. Today, he will give insights on the understandings epigenetics for constitutional prescribing and will share his experience through case presentation with us. I would like to inform you that you can ask your questions in the chat section and Q&A section in between the sessions. We will take pause for 2 or 3 sessions for 10 minutes. Now, without further delay, I am handing over to you, sir, the session.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's a new experience for me, doing online seminars, but not in India. And yes, so I try to manage here. I have to share, and here we go. But we go 2 slides back. So, welcome. I'm very happy that I was invited for this little seminar, 2 hours. I hope I can manage. And if you don't understand me because my language is difficult or whatever, please give me a hint and I try to correct my pronunciation a bit more. And let's see. And welcome to Hamburg as well. That is my hometown. That is the view of the harbor, and we call it the gateway to the world. So that's my beloved city, the second biggest city in Germany. And it's 60 kilometers from the sea, and a lot of trading and traffic is going on there. Just that you have a little impression. And the question is, understanding of epigenetics for constitutional prescribing. And does knowledge of genetics and epigenetics help in constitutional analysis? And what does it comprise in taking the family history? I would like to tell you a little bit about the background. You have seen I was working in Bosnia with war victims in this terrible war. And coming back from there, I could see the damage it had done to the German people, what happened in the Second World War, and the cruelties of the Nazi regime. I could really detect it, what I couldn't see before. And it became clear to me that some effects of what happened in the families or to the people was transferred to the generations after. That time, there were only psychological explanations. I did study psychology before I became a homeopath. And these explanations, yes, no, were somehow explanatory, but not really. And now we have this very new field of epigenetics that makes it much more understandable how traumatic and other effects are transformed. You know, we as homeopaths have always been asking what diseases mainly, that's how we learned it in Germany, which diseases the parents and the grandparents had. But the question is it enough to ask for the diseases in the family, or is there more? And that's what it's going to be about today. And I hope you will profit a little bit of the ideas I brought in. That's the program. I will give you a very brief introduction into epigenetics with a small case example. And then we will have 10 minutes pause. In these 10 minutes, please ask your questions that I can read them in this little pause, because otherwise I couldn't manage. And I hope not too many and not too difficult answers will come up. And then I will try to answer the questions in the following session. And we have the case with the recurrent depression. You have been sent these cases just to accelerate a bit the speed of presentation. I will go through the cases, but hopefully you have read them before, that you have them a bit in front of you. The same procedure again, 10 minutes pause. You post your questions and I try to answer. And then we'll follow this lengthy case of Still's syndrome, this lady. You've been sent as well, and then at the end we will have questions and answers. Okay, so let's start. A little story. Oh, I have to somehow get this button back here. I can move it. Sorry, because I cannot read. Can I put that? Yeah. So that is a little story from pretty beginning of my career. There was a little girl, 7 years old, and she was brought by her father, as she fears somebody would come and kill her when she goes to bed in the evening. This is going on every day for months already. There's no detectable causation. She tells the story just like that, very soberly. She's chubby, slow, and sluggish, and her father is pretty the same. And so in her history, there are no specific events, neither concerning diseases, nor birth, no pregnancy. She has no other fears. The family is fine, and they have no certain problems, no severe diseases. Oh, so lately, her desire for fried food stands out, and that was somehow the reason to give her plum bum, but no success. 5 weeks later, she turns back and the fears stay the same. And so I tried to somehow gain some additional information before I discovered the family history. The father's father, the girl's grandfather, dodged military service. He escaped from the military service in World War II. He dug himself a cave into the soil and was hiding there for years until the war ended successfully. And the girl's father, he got a bit emotional that time, tells now that his father had fear throughout these years to be executed as a deserter if the Nazis would have found him. They didn't find him, luckily, but for years he was staying in his hut under the ground and was fearing they will come and shoot him, as they do with a deserter. On this background, I prescribed opium C200. For rubric chosen was delusion shall be executed, and it didn't take long, and her fears went away and didn't return the following years. What does it tell us? What is the consequence? Is her fear of being murdered really rooted in the history of her grandfather? And if so, how did it come across to her? Inherited or transferred psychologically in the family? Or even further, does this history possibly affect her whole being? It is her constitution. Did it also shape the father's constitution? Might the whole family be affected by it? Those are questions you have to ask. And probably quite some of the above questions will be positive, but what do epigenetics contribute to this topic? Now we're coming to this bit theoretical part. What is epigenetics? It is a provisional definition epigenetics is concerned with factors ruling the activity of a gene and thus the development of the cell for a certain time. Epigenetics investigates changes of gene function not being based on mutation or recombination, but nevertheless being transferred to daughter cells. And that is the most interesting point. And they found factors that alter the gene expressions, as they say nowadays. You're probably a bit acquainted with it, I hope. And one important factor is the methylation of gene segments, blocking them to be transcribed. I will show you a picture after. Methylation and acetylation and phosphorylation of chromatin, which the histones form a framework with genes of the DNA. And it gets also modified by short mRNA opening certain segments for transcription, and it's also influencing telomeres, the end of the chromosomes that are responsible for the altering of the cells. Generally spoken, and that is really difficult. If you go into epigenetics, it gets difficult. It is a huge field of things, but generally these are complex, potent, potentially reversible and interconnected factors activating or inhibiting the generation of RNA proteins while reading the genes. So you see, as it is potentially reversible, we can see that here something is possible to be influenced by therapies, whatever. And so I believe we work a lot with that. Here's the picture to see. Look, on the left side, you see the open activated state with acetylated histones. Histones are the middle bubble that is enrolling the DNA. And you see on the left side it's opened and then readable. And you see the microRNA also. So then the gene can be expressed, it can be transferred, transcribed, and can act. So in an inactivated site on the right side, it's closed and it's methylated, and the DNA is hypermethylated. So you see these points, they activate or inactivate the genes. So that is merely what epigenetics is about. I don't want to go too deep into it, but that's the way it works. What is more interesting is how do epigenetic imprints arise and change? And the most important is the heredity. That's a difficult word for me. Approximately 50% of the epigenetic patterns are transmitted by the parents, mainly by the mother, but by the father too. But it's also much influenced by stresses like poisons, hunger, trauma, and many other factors alter the legibility of genes. And I noted here down, for example, it's very interesting in trauma. It is very important how the environment reacts. Loving care can reduce the stress significantly on the epigenetic level, and the other way around, improper reaction might increase negative imprints. Just to give you one example, they investigated people working in the bank that have been robbed. So they looked at how many of the people have been traumatized by this bank robbery, and they found out 1/3 after 6 weeks it was gone. They didn't get traumatized. 1/3 definitely got a post-traumatic stress syndrome. And 1/3, it depended on how the people around reacted. If they were empathetic with them, oh, take your time, it's not that bad, and you can do whatever you want to relax. And then the people didn't go into PTSD. if the environment was rough with them, why do you bother? It's over and forget about it. Then the people went into post-traumatic stress disorder. So these epigenetic imprints, the activity of genes, is much depending on the environment as well. So there's a lot to be done. Then the style of living, nutrition. It's the latest research on that shows that nutrition has enormous influence on diseases finally as well, but at first for the epigenetic patterns. And you might know there's epigenetic research on bees, and so the queen of the bees is made by nutrition. The nutrition decides whether you become a worker or the queen of bees. So a lot is about nutrition and, of course, the environmental conditions, smoking, etc. Getting older makes it different. The epigenetic imprints, they compared twins, and the twins initially had a similar pattern that divert more and more the longer they live, and wearing down, getting old, wear and tear decreases the precision of the transcription, so that the epigenetic imprints start to get less, be less stable. And that's, for example, a reason why elderly people develop warts and age spots and stuff like that. We don't want to have, isn't it? Okay. What do epigenetic factors operate? I will tell you this little mystery of Linnaeus pylori soon after, but first you have to see they govern the cell maturation and differentiation. So the differentiation of cells and their maturation is governed by epigenetic factors. They do the thing that you develop the cells this way, this way, this way. So they shape also the phenotype of the being, and they support or hinder reaction modes of the cell. So they govern the cell. The genes itself, it looks like, I'm exaggerating a bit, but the genes, it looks like, are more or less the toolbox. But the one who uses the toolbox is the epigenetic factors. So it becomes a great importance, and it gives a great importance to these epigenetic factors. And for the ladies, interesting, the epigenetic factors neutralize one of the X chromosomes, as you have two. Two would have been too much. So one needs to be silenced so that it avoids double activity. Nowadays, a lot of pathological disturbances in these regulations have been found as crucial in the setup of diseases like multiple sclerosis, cancer, metabolic disorders. The more the research is going on, the more diseases they find with epigenetic factors ruling into it. And there is an abundant research showing that sensitivity to stress is significantly influenced by epigenetics. That is depression, burnout, trauma, all this makes you prone to develop these diseases if you have a certain imprint that activates certain parts of the genes that are responsible for anxiety, anger, or whatever. So coming to the story of Linnaeus pyloria, you know, maybe Linnaeus was the one who created the big system, how to differentiate plants into families, clusters, whatever. And he was the man who invented this system for biology. And he lived 200 years ago. And then he classified the plants by the blossoms and how they were formed. And so one day there came a man to him, bringing him a toad flax. Toad flax is a certain plant, you can look it up. with a different blossom. You see that here on the picture on the right. And he said, this is impossible. He was flustered and he said, this is like a cow with a wolf's head. This is impossible. How did it come that this plant has two different varieties? And so he called it a peloria, which means a monster. And so this secret was unrevealed until lately, because when genetics came up, they said, this now we will differentiate the toad flax in its two varieties by the genetics. And so they investigated the plants, these two different plants, but they were genetically absolutely the same. So there was no explanation by genetics why they have two different blossoms. And then when epigenetics came up, then they could find epigenetic factors that were ruling the cell maturation of the blossoms, of course, as well, were ruling it in a different way in this variety. So the epigenetic difference made the difference how it looks like. So that's about how the phenotype is shaped, you know? Okay. The first hints on epigenetic factors that seem to be transferred from the grandfathers or grandparents' generation to the grandchildren was research in Överkalix in Sweden in the north. It is a very isolated town, and there was a hunger period in 1905. So they investigated the generations after by screening them from just the data they had on diseases and stuff like that. And they found out that the grandchildren of people experiencing hunger suffered significantly more from diabetes and obesity, finally. So, but this was not a general thing. The interesting thing is, if the grandfather had little to eat, it was favorable for the grandchildren. If he ate in that time a lot, they tended to develop diabetes and obesity, among others, the grandchildren. And in both cases, it was only significant if the grandfather was approximately 8 to 11 years old. That's the time when men start to produce sperms. The opposite was true to the grandmothers. If they had good food supply, it was much favorable to the health of the grandchildren. But when grannies experienced hunger in the womb of their mothers up to 2 years of age, that's the time women start to produce follicle, it turned negative to the following generations. So the imprint was made during the time sperms and follicles were produced. Quite reasonable that this gives an information to the following generation. Hunger is on, save your food or whatever, and try to get obese or something like that. It is more difficult. If you want to read out, that's why I put in where the research is. If you want to read out the more about it, check the research there. Just to give you a hint. Another interesting research was made in Holland, where the Nazis blocked totally the food in 1944 and 45. People were starving there. It was horrible again. You know, the Germans conquered Holland at that time, and as the war was ending, the resources got thin, and so they didn't give any more food to the Dutch people. The second and third generation after had a high prevalence to obesity among other maladies. You know, obesity, we have a big problem here in India. It's a bit different, I think, but some obese people you have as well. And if you see therapies on obesity, it is mostly a failure. Obese people to treat is a difficult thing. And if you look at the possible imprintment by hunger of grandparents, you might come to the conclusion that the problem is there, not so much in this person. So that might make a difference for therapy of obesity. Interesting is that it depended here on the time the fetus experienced hunger. In the first half of pregnancy, it led mainly to adipositas. If the fetus experienced hunger in the second half of the pregnancy, it was low weight, resulting and carbohydrate metabolism disturbed. You see tendency, psychological, lung, kidney problems, and even higher risk of getting breast cancer. So the question is, and there was a long debate, whether these epigenetic factors are transmitted transgenerationally. The interesting thing is when the follicle and the sperm come together, in a certain phase, all epigenetic imprints are deleted. So that's why the people, the very genetic people, they said it's useless because anyway it gets deleted initially in the fetus and then it's rebuilt, the epigenetic factors. But that doesn't seem to be true. So if you look at mothers being traumatized in childhood, they have a higher risk of their children to develop autistic disorders, higher risk of obesity again. And analyzing DNA probe of women in experiencing violence in refugee camps and regions of crisis have the same epigenetic changes in their children. That was a TV report in Germany. And from grandparents to grandchildren, they found out traumatic stress women experience in pregnancy is detectable in the grandchildren. And you see this research on the end in Rio de Janeiro, where they could find out from the saliva of the grandchildren which grandmother was traumatized by violence. Imagine, what an imprint. That means a lot. And it became clear in tests with mice, but also with human beings now, that it shapes the mental setup of the following generations. So the babies of mice taken away from the mother, which stressed them extremely, were sustainably traumatized and showed typical epigenetic changes, which is also now found in human beings. And the babies of these mice, in turn, were epigenetically imprinted. Thus, they reacted with much more stress and anxiety than normal, even if they then grew up in a normal environment. But even their children, again, carried the imprintment as shown in, there's a mistake. Helmholtz, that is written differently, the center in Munich that made this research. They do a lot of research there about these epigenetic things, and it's you hardly can follow the research that is going on. This is massive. On the other hand, interestingly, the children of traumatized fathers tend to bear more risks, which could also be a fact of trauma. So what is interesting? So we see there is an imprint epigenetic, and Dr. Vijayka has set up for the first time in history, in homeopathic history, he defined constitution. Before we had these pulsatilla characterizations of blue eye, blonde hair, widespread in India, I guess, which doesn't really tell something about what is a constitution. He said there is a genetic presentation of DNA in humans according to his definition. It is a mental setup. It won't go through all of it, but if somebody is introverted or extroverted, if he has a strong will or a weak will, if he's sensitive very much, what we've seen in the mice and all that, and the emotional reactions. And he looks at the physical setup, hair, face configuration, muscle fibers, and posture. and general appearance, speed, activity, side effects, temperature, thirst, and all that. And the immune reactions he defines by the miasmatic reaction he defines with SORA is inflammation, psychosis, adaptation. These are, adaptation is also a conventional medicine term, and syphilis, apoptosis, or gangrene. And so he defines genetic patterns of the constitution, how you appear and react. And so this gives us now the chance to align research that is going on with homeopathic clusters to define the constitution. So this is very exciting to me, because now we have a defined setup. We might work on this setup more differentiated, but more no matter what, but it is at least a framework we can align with scientific knowledge of today. So if you look at what shapes the physical appearance, you see that Vijayka doesn't differentiate much between genetics and epigenetics, though he has it in mind, definitely, but in his writings or in his presentations. So if you look at what shapes the physical appearance, you see genetics, the genes itself, do form the hair color, but the eye color is formed epigenetically. The curls, again, are genetically determined. If you look at dwarfishness, it can be a genetic imprint or an epigenetic imprint. So, you know, if you ask, are your parents tall or dwarfish, you probably wouldn't say. Then you see the difference, possibly, if it's an epigenetic imprint or not. So you might find, oh, the parents, grandparents had normal size. So why does this person have in dwarfishness and gigantism genetically? You can determine scientifically there was somebody with a genetic mutation 11,000 years ago that can really say when this happened. And from that on, everybody in the following generation had this kind of big or small size. And adipositas and emaciation are also, adipositas is both possible. I gave you the sources, so you might look it up yourself. So we see that genetics and epigenetics shape physical appearance. So we might differentiate that a bit more. So that was my excursion into epigenetics. So back to the little girl. Epigenetics show that fear and traumatic experience can be transferred transgenerationally. And if you have fear of being executed for years, this is in your genes, I believe. The fear of her grandfather to be executed was transmitted. So her appearance, according to Dr. Vijayka, you know, he has this trimiasmatic appearance of remedies, which is very, very good to me, because I had experience already that the picture of remedies was not like they were defined in the Materia Medica, and the explanation is the three miasmatic appearance or presentation of remedies. So here he says the typical psychotic picture of opium is slow, sluggish, dull senses, factual speech, and fear of being murdered. What he says is usually a psychotic, but in this case, I don't know if it's psychotic. And the father appeared similar, you know, bit dull, bit sluggish, bit obese, you know. And he said, I asked him about the story of his father. And he said, yeah, we knew about it, but it was not an important story. But it must have been story, I guess. So we can conclude a transmitted fear influenced girls' and fathers' constitution. And this is what I'm going to talk about in the following cases. But now we make a little pause and you can put your questions and I try to answer after. I hope you understood it all well. If you had a problem to understand, please let me know as well. Okay. 10 minutes pause means, oh yeah, your time is different. In 10 minutes we meet again, yeah?
Yes, sir, sure. If anyone has any questions, please put your question in chat box. If you want, I will phrase out the questions for you.
Oh, that would be interesting, yeah. Would help me.
How can we assess it in a lab setting?
Yeah, that would be very interesting. I will tell something at the beginning. Is there any other question?
So, yes, sir. Dr. Surbhi Singhal asking question. Nowadays, Corona is affecting our whole world. So, according to epigenetics, should we see the effect of this in our grandchildren's?
I'm not getting old enough to answer this question. Okay, let's see. We'll make a little pause and then go on in 5 minutes, yeah? Isn't it?
Okay, sir. Fine, sir.
Yeah, okay.
Yes, sir. One question is from Remya R. Is this if autism is a result of mental trauma in mother, then is it a genetic or epigenetic?
Autism, okay. The other was if we can find it in a laboratory. The corona question. So 3 questions, yeah, right?
Yes, sir.
Lovely that you do that for me. It's much easier for me.
Okay, sir.
So shall we start anew?
Yes, sir. Sure.
Okay. So I might answer the questions. 3 questions have been coming up. Is it? Am I audible now? Yeah, should be. Okay. There was one question about whether we can find in the laboratories the effects, if we can see effects of homeopathic treatment in the epigenetic imprints. Well, nowadays, I don't see that much has been done yet. My colleague in my clinic, Gregor Kindelman, a very intelligent homeopath, he's founded 2 companies and is working with an institute, a well-recommended institute in Germany, and was looking at standardized cancer cell lines. And you know, the HeLa cell lines, I don't know if you're acquainted with that. There is a breast cancer from a woman 30, 40 years ago. And these cancer cells are bred all the time. And it's a standardized feature to test medicaments on these cancer cells because they always stay the same as cancer cells are. And you can see how genetic parts are activated or not activated, and they even can read epigenetic factors. So he's about to start a research on that, and I think this is the point where we stand. We haven't started really yet with it. The question is whether epigenetic imprints can change. It looks that epigenetic imprints are very different how stable they are. And so it looks like, for example, that in the person having these epigenetic changes, some things might not change. but in the following generation it will change if you treat it well. And some things seem to change. So I'm not sure. This is a whole new field of research. Epigenetics are recognized since approximately 10 years. This is not much. So there is also in conventional medicine, it is a whole field of research that is open to many things to be understood, and even conventional and scientific world is not completely through with this topic. It's still under research a lot. It's very new and very exciting, and but there's so much material coming out. It is difficult to judge what effects we have. I believe that we work on that area, and I would have liked to show you some more things, some cases, but that time is too short today to do that. But I believe we work on that, but I cannot prove. So in the future, I would like to see that we can see changes in epigenetic testing, but that is far away still, I think. Well, my colleague is about to do that. He's raising funds at the moment. So if you have a few millions, come along with it. The autism debate. Actually, I must say, I didn't treat autism much. And so I'm not the expert in that. And I've seen several cases where certain imprints in the pregnancy, and that Vijayka also emphasizes, certain imprints in the pregnancy can be responsible for autism. But there's also other research on the bacteria of the intestines. The bacteria in our intestines are very important for us, and there's, the connection with the nutrition that forms us a lot. They did tests on rats and found out that autism seems to be influenced by bacteria in the intestines. So, where's the core point for autism? I can't say, but definitely, it's as you could see in the research on the hunger winter in Holland, there was a lot of grandchildren being more likely to develop autism because of the hunger of the grandparents. So it seems you can have many different imprints favoring autism according to grandparents, mother's state in the pregnancy, and the bacteria in the intestines. So it is probably very individual where we find the point of the disease origin. The cases I've seen were much formed by the state of the mother in the pregnancy, and one case I remember, it's where the mother had an abortion, or 2 abortions, I think, before the child was born, and so she was very scared that this might happen again. And then she was praying and praying, and the remedy was veratrum. And so that was very clearly of her state and what happened to her before. But, this fear was strong. And so that had an impact on the child. But, yeah, to generalize it, I'm at odds to make a clear statement on that. Okay, and then the question on the corona, might it affect the following generations? Well, the disease itself, I can't say. But what I found now, after months of lockdown here, I have had quite a bunch of children with obsessive anxiety disorders, how do you say, but obsessions. And of course, if you're scared of infections and all that, it might, if it's collectively so pushed with anxiety, it might affect the following generations. But I won't be getting old enough to judge that because it's going to affect our grandchildren. And so, but I can imagine it's more the anxiety than the disease itself, I think. Okay, all questions answered, I hope. We have to go on. Dr. Abhishek?
Yes, sir.
All answered?
One question is more. So, from Harshita Paul, question is there, sir, in the hunger winter case, if the child is
Yes.
born to a healthy parents, what are the chances of them getting autism?
Didn't get it completely. You mean if the
If the child,
parents?
yes, sir, if the child is born to a healthy parents, what are the
Yeah.
chances of them getting autism?
I don't think that much, but it was connected to the hunger question, wasn't it?
Yes, sir.
If the parents faced hunger but have a healthy child.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, but if it's a girl, because the follicles are built in the womb and 2 years after birth, she will have the information in her follicles that hunger is endangering us. So then the disposition of her children to become autistic is more likely. Yeah?
Okay, sir.
Okay, so we go on with this case.
Yes, sir.
You have been sent. And I would go through it. You know, this tall, lean man. He was really very direct, clear. I have recurrent depressions, but only short, 1 to 3 weeks, which is really funny in a way. And I tried many therapies, he said, like client-centered counseling and Freudian analysis, but nothing worked. And then he said, and all this because although my life is okay. I said, okay, how is your life? He said, I've got my own business, I have a lovely girlfriend, but I cannot enjoy life. I said, well, why can't you enjoy life? He says, I don't like myself. I said, why? He says, I see my mistakes, conversations run through my brain after some debates. I said, why? He says, I always say wrong things. He gets excited in discussions and then he says something and after it, he innerly topples over or inwardly, and innerly, I wrote, inwardly, he topples over and thinks, oh, why did I say that? And then I would like to excuse myself for everything I said. And I even don't understand why I made a certain statement. And I said, so how do you feel about yourself? And he says, on one hand, lovable, but on the other hand, detestable, very bad. And I said, in which way? He said, I feel like an unlucky fellow. I went through a lot of things and I lost plenty. He said, life is too tiring. It doesn't work out. In German, the expression is, the bill doesn't come out even. So I said, well, when did it start? And he said, I don't remember, but it started at least 10 years ago. I know these feelings. And then I asked what is going on? And he said he's completely at odds with his mother. She ousted him from her joint business 4 years ago to substitute him with her new partner. Then he started his own business in the same field. And they said, what happened then? He said, yeah, he got a softened inguinal ligament on the right, and he got operated to avoid a hernia. And I said, what about your mother? He said, she's a single mother, and I despise her. But he said, I don't want to talk about it again. I did it in all these therapies and nothing helped me in that. So I'm really fed up talking about my mother. And then I said, okay, don't worry. I don't need to know the whole story. And I was asking on, and then he said his grandmother had depression too. And he felt very close to her. I said, what happened to her? And he said, it started in the war. Her husband spent years in Russian captivity, in Siberia, very hard stuff. And she was alone with 5 children and completely overburdened. And as a result, she became depressive. I said, can you tell me a bit more about your grandmother? And he was a bit bitter. And he said, I don't know much about her, but it was important somehow to him. And he said she had depression all the time. He remembers after the death of her husband, she blossomed out for a short while again initially, but later she stopped doing things and developed a cancer, didn't die of it. But I said, why do you think she broke down again? And he said, maybe it was because her cat was poisoned and her dog needed to be put down. I said, what happened on? And he said, when I was 17, she was put into a geriatric asylum with dementia, most probably, and that was it. About himself, he says, he always was a good boy, obedient and diligent, weeps easily, especially from music, that's embarrassing to him. In his early 20s, he developed a recurrent melanoma. I said, what? He said, yeah. It started right from the honeymoon after marriage. One after the other, he said, and it was always taken out, so they search the skin every 3 months, and again and again they have to take out some melanoma. And he said, and when I split it up from my wife after 5 years, it was over. Ever since, melanoma never did come back. I was asking what was going on in your marriage, and he said, no, there was nothing negative. There was nothing. We had a good time, and then we were somehow drifting apart, and then the relationship ended without quarrels. They agreed to split up, and else he has a lumbago every now and then, no real modalities, and says he feels vulnerable there. You see his cravings, not very interesting, but he wakes up at 2 and 4 o'clock, partially every 2 hours, with hunger, thirst, and desire for cigarettes. And since several years, he wakes up at 8 o'clock when he's compelled to do something. This obsession came on when the quarrels with his mother were escalating. So, quite clear-cut case, not very long, not very complicated. Did you come across some remedy? I would like to ask you before presenting my analysis. And do I have to go out? I think I go out and see Dr. Abhishek.
Yes, sir.
Hopefully some ideas come up, what kind of remedy this man would need. Is there something coming?
So one answer is coming from Dr. Surbhi Singhal. The remedies mentioned by her is Nux vomica.
Okay. Is there more?
No, sir, no other response.
Okay, so I don't want to pressure you much, but I hope. So I share the screen again.
Yes, sir.
So if you look at the analysis I did, it's evident that his disposition to develop depressions exists for a long time already. It is longer than his problem with his mother. You know, every psychologist was going for this problem with his mother, but he had depression since 10 years, not since 4 years. So this is not the reason. Psychotherapy was inefficient. A reactive depression is most unlikely. You know, psychotherapy often is very helpful if you have a reactive depression or reactive problems. Something happened and you lost your child or whatever, then usually psychotherapy is good. If you have this constitutional tendency to depression, then psychotherapy often is without success. We can see that he is syphilitic just because of his melanoma, and the individual symptoms I've chosen is, this is a typical Vijayka way of analyzing, is contempt for himself as well as for his mother, which is maybe a bit understandable. Contradiction with himself, after his discussions, and then he has this self-judgment, I did everything wrong, and the life doesn't work out, the bill doesn't pay even, so delusion, everything will fail. Additional symptoms, sleep disturbances, disposition to melanoma, hernia, hernia. And so if you put that into a rubric, into a program, you see mind contemptuous of oneself, I took, antagonism with himself, delusion, he cannot succeed, music aggravates, sleep, waking, abdomen hernia on the right. We know which remedies are on the right. Naxomica was one of them, and the other is Aurum. So I gave him Aurum. And if you look at his constitution, he's a typical good boy. He's diligent, obedient, positive, she throws me out, I just build up my own business again. So, he does things, he's conscientious, he's morally, his remorse after saying something wrong. Whether he's introverted or not, I wasn't very sure, but his tendency is to get angry and this kind of sadness. And the hernia on the right. So what I did was I gave him Aurum Metallicum 50M. You will ask me, why 50M? I had the idea that time, it's quite some time ago, this case, I had the idea that if the grandmother is involved and is putting an imprintment on her grandchild, I need to give a 50M. I'm not sure nowadays about it. Anyway, I'm very sure the right remedy is the most important thing and not so much the potency. But that's how I did at that time. Debatable, but... So if you look at the Constitution and the inheritance you might think of, whether his Constitution was shaped by his ancestors. When you look at the history of his grandmother, husband in captivity, overburdened with 5 kids, and then developing a depression, she never got out again. We could describe his state with ailments from unusual responsibility. Too much. And, Fatak's repertory says Aurum. And this is a bit now speculative what you hear now, but I'm pretty sure there's something about it. Possible message to the following generation might be diligent and dutiful, otherwise you will be overburdened by responsibilities, becoming depressive. And indeed, this situation she was in, it would have been this kind of approach to cope with the situation his granny was in, to work, and fulfill the responsibility for 5 children as a mother. And then this melanoma thing. I never heard a story again like this. It is mysterious why he developed the melanoma as long as he was married. Dr. Jacob describes possible reasons for vitiligo, affecting melanocytes as well, as a melanoma, or destroyed relationships. Nowadays, he would say that was a wrong concept. One could imagine that Granny didn't experience her marriage as reliable. Being without her husband at least added to the get depressive. Alone, I don't know. Nevertheless, she might have passed on to the following generation that marriage is possibly not reliable. Seems, at least, unbelievable that his melanoma stopped subsiding after divorce. Come on, why is that? And so if you look at the genetics and epigenetics, only 10% of the melanoma accumulate in families with several genetic defects. 90% are unclear genetically. Recently, but they found an epigenetic factor that at least was responsible for the quick metastasis of melanoma. Melanoma, they spread quickly. And they blocked this epigenetic factor in mice, and the metastasis was reduced significantly, very much. And in some of them, even it didn't grow anymore. So it is imaginable that this patient's divorce had a positive impact on his epigenetic factors. It's strange. I've presented that in India, and I felt some people were saying, how can a marriage be positive and divorce be positive? But at least here it is like that. Stopped when. So have a look at the follow-up. The depressions didn't return for 16 months. He was well all the time. The sleep disturbances and the obsession compelling him to do something in the morning subsided within 10 days approximately. He had no lumbago anymore. And after 16 months, he returned with the remark, the gold is finished. I always tell the patients what they get. We have a different kind of prescribing here in Germany than in India. At least I'm very transparent with everything I think about the patient. I tell the people why I prescribe them what. So I told him that he was given Aurum, and I don't see the big problems in judging the effect of a remedy. If a remedy really works, there's not much that somebody read something in the internet and found, oh, this is good and now he's well. No, if the remedy fits, you can detect that, I believe. So, but he returns because of his lumbago. It returns in several weeks. And I said, well, what about the depression? And he said, no depression, but the last weeks I was more irritable. Okay. And then I gave him a C200, and he had no complaints anymore, at least 2 years after. I treated his girlfriend, meanwhile, unsuccessfully, I must admit. So that's why she came for 2 years and knew he was fine. Okay, yeah. You might ask some questions now. Otherwise, the conclusion for me is Granny's story added much to understanding the case for me. But when he told me this, the Aurum was very clear to me. I'm quite positive his constitution was highly influenced by his granny. Of course, from today's perspective, I would investigate her story more precisely if possible. That's always a difficult thing. If somebody died already, how do you get out more of her story? But my observation is, if grandsons and granddaughters relate closely with some of the grandparents, and if there is a problem, then often you have a transgenerational topic. Because they feel somehow associated with what happened to the grandparents. And that's why they relate closely with them, I guess. So at least you might have a look on such things. And what I found also very important is to the patient, because the patient doesn't know why this happens to him. Nothing in his life, you know what this man said. Everything, although everything is okay, he couldn't detect anything in his life why he had these depressions. The psychologist tried it. But when he understood that he got some imprint from his grandmother, he was relieved. He said, okay, I understand why this happens to me. And then, if he, patients always want to have a diagnosis. I always tell them it's good if you didn't get a diagnosis, then nothing bad is going on. But people want to have a diagnosis because they want to identify the reason why something bad is happening to them, why they are diseased. So this point is very relieving for the people if you can relate to the ancestors, why they have it. So to me, this was an extension of therapy in a way for the people to relate to their own disease, why they have it, and how they can get rid of it. Okay, so it's time for a question, isn't it?
Sir, Vinay Kumar asking a question: How can we easily differentiate epigenetics from genetics? Yes.
Okay, easily not, because it's a system working together. But genetics are fixed for generations. That is, you have these some genetic cancers, for example, in the intestines, that is genetically given. Then many of these families, they have these cancers in the intestines. And breast cancer sometimes is determined. So you see it in a long line. So, and not some. Epigenetics is very individual in a way. It is something that comes from grandparents or parents, not more usually. Maybe they could see in mice now that even 5 or 7 generations on something is transmitted further, but that is less likely. I have had patients, I remember one platina case that where the ancestors have been thrown out of the family. Platina has this delusion not being a member of the family, so they were taken to some other places, whatever, and again for 5 generations. So that was an imprinting that went on a bit longer, but usually it's not that long. Genetic mutations, that is in diseases like what's the English word for that? That is a difficult one. This blood cancer that is in the marrows, myogenic. I don't know. There's a lymphatic cancer and the myogenic. I don't know how you pronounce that. So there you have a lot of genetic imprints. They always investigate the people if they have this kind of cancer on the genetic changes. But even in this, they found there is a epigenetic factor, several epigenetic factors that nurture the cancer. So just to give you one example, there is this lady, she came to me because of this cancer, blood cancer, and myogenic, how do you say? And she was the one with the worst genetic imprint of the 10 people that were in this isolation station where they get stem cells from some other person implanted to overcome their cancer. But she was among the 10, I think, was the patients in this isolation station. And she was the one that had the worst genetic disposition to develop this cancer. And I treated her even before she got into this situation, and very nicely. I will not tell you the remedy. I might be presenting it again. And so she was taken into this station for transplanting the stem cells. And she was the only of the people there that survived. They found epigenetic factors that are much pushing this kind of cancer. So I believe I didn't change the genes. That disposition by the genetic factors she had is still there. But I possibly work on the epigenetic factors. So you have diseases where all this comes together. Of course, they are less good treatable, but she lives now since 15 years without any relapse. And I don't know if it answers your question, but at least I could speak a long time. Sorry. Any other question?
So one question is for about the constitutional remedies. Is there how does constitutional remedies act in the patients?
How?
How is
No, we don't know how our remedies work, unfortunately. But it is obvious to me, I've been treating a lot of traumatic patients in Bosnia, here and everywhere. But what happens after a good prescription is they relax. And they do a certain process to overcome this trauma. A trauma, either you are in this anxiety state or in this numb state, not feeling anything. There are these three facets of traumatic, and the third one is always flashbacks coming back about this as if you are in the situation. So what happens is it calms them down, and it comes to a process where they can feel this happened that time, but is not today anymore. So you can say it strengthens their resilience. I don't know if you're acquainted with resilience, the ability to overcome certain things, certain experiences. They can manage to get through. Means if we treat constitutionally, the disposition, the weaknesses, everybody of us has certain weaknesses. So, and this weakness, this sensitivity to certain things, that is strengthened with the constitutional remedy. Then your constitution can overcome what happened there. So you don't give a kind of trauma remedy. Sometimes you have to give trauma remedies, but especially acute, but you don't give a trauma remedy because of what happened from outside, but you treat that weakness in the person, why this person cannot overcome it. And that's what the remedies do. Okay? Anything else?
so one more question from Vedant.
Seven. Is it good to have 7 questions? Well, give me 3 of the most important ones, and the other ones we do at the end, is it?
Okay, sir. Okay, sir. One question, sir, is related to the question from Vedanath as, can Batch-Peterson's bowel nosodes have some bearings on epigenetics?
Nosodes.
Yes, sir.
I'm the one who is absolutely addicted to the law of similars. If it's similar to the patient, the similarity is philosophically difficult, but the similarity to what the patient suffers of is the line, no matter if it's nosodes or any other remedy. Nosodes, if you want to have, if you want to treat some genetic disposition, you might think of, if the grandparents had tuberculosis, you might give tuberculinum. It doesn't work very well. It has a kind of similarity, but not the similar often. So you will experience with tuberculinum giving in such. If you're desperate, you do sometimes, but I rarely do. Then you get a kind of push into the case that it moves a bit forward, but you don't have a solution. The solution is as Vijayka says, genetic simillimum. Okay. Other question?
No other question, sir.
Okay. Okay, so we go on, is it?
Yes, sir.
So, let's see. I don't want to stop sharing. Sorry, I made a mistake here. Share. Wait, what did... is it still sharing? No.
Yes, sir, it is a sharing mode on.
It's still?
Yes, sir, it is share.
Okay, so you see my slides now. Okay, so we come to this bit lengthy case. That's why, especially why I sent in the cases before.
Sir, sorry to interrupt you, but slide is not visible.
Is not visible.
Yes.
Okay, share.
Yeah, now it is visible, sir.
Okay, sorry. I'm very sorry. I did all. Okay.
Okay, sir.
Now it's okay, yeah?
Yes, sir, it's okay, sir.
Okay. I must apologize. I'm used to Zoom, which is the tool we use here for online, and this WebEx is very new to me. So I'm a bit, and I'm not the computer specialist. Okay, this is the bit lengthy case I present you because it shows a lot. I think it shows a lot. This lady has a Still syndrome, so I will not read everything out to you, especially these laboratory things. I will drop as you have it yourself. One thing I forgot to tell you is you will get this presentation afterwards as a PDF. So you don't have to write anything anymore. I should have said in the beginning, sorry. So this is a lady with a recurrent Still syndrome. Not everybody might be acquainted with the Still syndrome. It's a rare autoimmune disease, which usually starts with a big feverish thing. And you see it has joint pains and some throat pains initially, possibly. And it's often in young people. And the prognosis usually is good, but rarely, like in this case, it becomes chronic or is recurrent. And the interesting fact about it is that this autoimmune disease does not form antibodies, but some complex overshooting immune reaction activates interleukin. And the genetics are not clear. There are no certain genome changes. Epigenetic factors are likely, but not proven yet. And initializing trigger like infections are discussed. And lately they used monoclonal antibodies of, I don't know how do you pronounce that, I dropped that. And they have been effective, just to inform you about the disease. Just the overview. First incident in 1996 when she was 17 as an exchange student or pupil in a tense guest family situation abroad. She got admitted into hospital there, later ICU. due to multiple organ affection. Relapses 1997 and now 2008. That was nearly the, beginning 2009 was the case taking. And depression since 2008, psychotherapy and antidepressant she's taking. And she has Jewish ancestors, being married with Christians, and they suffered under the Nazi regime. So this is what I not all will read out to you, but the onset was when she was as an exchange pupil in Russia. In January, she developed fever, was taken to hospital, and had swelling of lymphatic glands and of external throat, at the external throat, and abdominal pain with slight diarrhea. And she was a bit dehydrated. You see the things they analyzed in the blood. Her state got worse. They gave her clindamycin and all that kind of antibiotics. The fever went higher up. This is Celsius degrees. I think you still do Fahrenheit. 39.5 is really high. And then she developed the jaundice. Bilirubin was normal, myalgic pains and persistent cough, hepatosplenomegaly, ascites, and an infiltration of lower lobes of the lung was diagnosed. Additionally, she developed a patchy rash on torso and extremities. Liver parameters were rising because the therapy was ineffective. She was brought to a larger hospital, and the day after getting there, she fell into a coma because of circulation collapse and an acute dyspnea syndrome, and she needed to be ventilated artificially. All organs were affected except the heart. These infiltrations in the pleura and additional pains and swelling of knees. And fortunately, this hospital in Russia, they were linked up with an American hospital, a very famous one. And so they communicated with them in America, and that's how they got to the diagnosis of Still syndrome. And so the typical therapy is high doses of prednisolone, which brought her out, and 3 years after, and for 3 years after, she had a low dose of prednisolone. So the story was, she came into a family with a daughter of the same age. They lived in the same room, and she said they developed a kind of love-hate relationship. Shared room, friends, and went to the same class. And they got very close on one hand, but quarreled a lot too. And she later concluded that this daughter probably had the fear that she is trying to take over her place in the family. The guest family itself was quite cold towards they had big financial problems, and she had the feeling, I'm not welcomed here. I've been only invited to finance the daughter sometime abroad because that was the daughter's wish. I said, well, how was it quarreling there? And she said she felt excluded, helpless, and treated cruel. She withdrew increasingly as a result. And, 17, first time away from home at all. She had the feeling nobody likes me, and developed guilt feelings for not doing enough in the household and things like that. And she felt lonesome. And the kind of lonesomeness, loneliness, she described as if being in a nutshell on the ocean, totally alone. Later on, she had the repeated fantasy as if lying in a box on the bottom of the sea. Another exchange student was around and in the family, and with her she got along very well. And that helped her initially. She lived with also in that family, and was a kind of buffer between her and the daughter of the family, who obviously had big problems. She threatened her in quarrels, for example, to cut her arms, and that thing, really rude hysterical reactions. And then this exchange student who was there as well went back home, and that was the time she got sick. And before that, for 6 months, she had no menses. So she had a relapse in 1997, though she was taking prednisolone. Then they increased prednisolone, and that helped along, obviously. And now, since December 2008, came back again. Quite strong feature of pains. She said it was a protracted cold, as she says, but joint pains came back, finger and toe joints swollen. And following this, itching rash came on again on torso and extremities, itching at night in bed, pretty strong. Sometimes she wakes from itching, and her foot joint on the left was painful, especially at night, pains as if broken, extending over the whole foot. The interesting fact was that the pain shift from one joint to the other, alternating sides most of the time. Within one day, it could change from one foot to the other, and that was the same with knee, finger, and toe joints. Generally feeling weak in the relapse, profuse perspiration and motion at night, especially on the torso, scratching in the throat, chilly, pains arose beginning of December, you see, and since middle of December she takes prednisolone 60 milligram, and that ameliorated the complaints on Christmas. Now she's taking 5 milligram, but you know, she got this kind of puffy face that is so typical for cortisone therapy. And her doctor said the inflammation was reducing pretty slow, was not that good effect. That's probably why she turned up to me. Mental state, she was depressive, feared nobody could bear her like that, but on the other hand, she felt indecisive because she felt better staying with her friend or her mother. Depression is already since February 2008. She's workless, and that worries her because she's now down to security money and on the low scale, and she's frustrated because so many applications fail. Nobody wants me, and she developed a self-hatred and got envious for others. She felt like a Ricky Meinhof. The old ones might know with you, but she was a very intellectual and sensitive German terrorist in the 70s. And in Germany, very well known because she was excluded or segregated by her own group. They were in jail, and also before they got in jail, they picked on her, and finally they all committed suicide. But that is a very known story in Germany, that this lady, she just felt the world so unjust. That's why she got into it. And she was not this kind of rude, violent terrorist, but she was highly educated. She was the daughter of a priest. And yeah, there was a lot going on that. And that's funny that this young lady was speaking about that, because it's 40 years ago, 50 years ago now. And so because of these depressions, she takes antidepressant and goes to therapy as well. But lately, fortunately, she found work by the help of her mother. And she said again, I asked how was the relapse, and it was this protracted cold she said she had when she was 16. That was the time there in Russia when it started on, and spatter of hot drinks followed by cough and cries in the daytime. This could also be a prodrome of the Still syndrome. Before it started, she had a very stressful situation. Now, this relapse, as she could not handle 50 children she was caring for. One child ran away, which is in Germany a big thing if you don't take care for the children. This incident brought her self-esteem totally down to zero, feeling helpless. She believed the children didn't like her, which felt like an error to her heart. She said she desired to go home and crouch down, and she feels tiny at work and thinks, hopefully nobody realizes how incapable I am. And also she was giving a seminar. She was trying many things to get jobs. And one participant said afterwards, I didn't learn anything here. And she thought, I'll give up. In such a situation, that is interesting now. How do you feel in these situations? She said, it's the same cascade of destructive feelings coming up. She has cruel pictures at night, a rotating scythe, you know, this thing you farmers cut crop with, big knife. The rotating scythe in her lower abdomen cuts and destroys everything precious to her down to the roots. I said, what is the precious thing? And it's my parents, my boyfriend, her best friend. And she feels like she has to sacrifice herself with the fantasies of razor blades in her throat she has done. My God. After the initial episode, many negative feelings came up, and in psychotherapy, she developed strong anger towards her parents, and she felt emotional reflections were missing from them. There was no appreciation for her own being, and they didn't react at all. You will see later on, this is a typical after-war family, because they don't react. The motto seemed to be, one has to look after himself. And what she managed that with a psychotherapist that her parents agreed to enter into clarifying talks with, which helped her a lot. She had an otitis of a disappointed love. That is not very important. Parents and her 5-year younger sister are basically healthy. You see parents also not very. Then we came to the history of the family. And that was the key for me. The grandfather on the father's side died in 1963 at the age of 63 from an illness. And it was possibly a result of being detained in a concentration camp in 1938 and 39, where he developed a disease with the stomach. She didn't know abdomen, she didn't know what it was, but it was clear that he had a problem with his intestines. He was half Jewish. Another criticism on Adolf Hitler, and that's why they detained him. But then he was released, but he was forced to labor. There was a certain Nazi organization where they forced them to labor, and he was again and again forced to work for the Nazis. His Jewish mother was deported from a nursing home into a concentration camp in 1944 at the age of 74. My God, she returned home after the war, but then she died as a consequence of the concentration camp a few weeks later. And the grandfather's half-Jewish sister was married to a German Aryan, as they say, having one child with him. Rumors said he was a Nazi. But having a child with him, his sister was safe. That was pretty clear that if you have a child with an Aryan and she was only half Jewish, then they wouldn't bring her to concentration camp. But shortly before the war ended, the grandfather tried to hide, as he heard rumors he shall be deported, and so he tried to hide at his sister's house, but she didn't open the door. Later on, she moved to the south of Germany, and they had rarely contact and on. So after the war, the family was suffering heavily from hunger in the strong winters after the war. First child born, for example, in 1947, that were also very hard winters that time, was fed with potato peels. And in this situation, the grandfather got at odds with his wife's mother regarding financial issues. Of course, they had all these, this financial things, and after war there was nothing. People had nothing, and they lived in her house, and the mother-in-law was a Protestant Christian, but that was not the point. But the financial issues was that his wife's mother then drove them out of the house, repudiating her daughter as well. Marriage of grandfather and grandmother was molded by loud arguments and finally scattered or shattered when he died. Grandfather had a daughter from his from his first wife too, and his son, the patient's father, completely pushed aside that he has a half sister. Later, she was asking him. He said, "Oh yeah, I know, but I don't know her." Completely. So the other side, you can see it's not a big thing. General sleep and long sleep, but lately she wakes too early, but not. And her dreams are interesting. Her dreams are often about killing enemies. Lately, she dreamt that she killed her mother as she was together with her boyfriend. And when she came back from Russia, she dreamt that she was wrapped up like a mummy and gets unwrapped. Okay. Groups scare her, but also attract her. She desires support. That is pretty strong in her. You know, also for me as a therapist, it was like she was a bit hanging on me. And although she was very intelligent and understood herself quite well, but it was only her mother that could give her a job. And, you know, this kind of support seeking was very much. And she has unrevealed, she doesn't tell her boyfriend, attacks of aggression during conflicts with her boyfriend. She fantasizes to stab him or to pour boiling water over him. Lovely friendship. Menses is irregular, takes contraceptives now. Constitutionally, she was introverted, diligent, reasonable, positive. That was unclear, but she was somebody acting from the second line, a wire puller. She said, "I'm good in strategies." And chilly and thirstless. So I think you might not know this remedy, you might not easily go through this, and as we are a bit, well, let's see, we have to close soon, isn't it? 2 hours. I give you the analysis: not being welcome, not being desired in the hosting family. She felt rejected, segregated, and bad conscience and withdrew. And when the buffer, the other student, you know, desire for support, the support was gone, then she developed this Still syndrome. And the relapse 2008 had similar proceedings, rejection and segregation, analogous the grandfather's situation, his sister risking his death by not welcoming him in a desperate situation, is an extreme denial of support in the family, isn't it? So the pattern of a split-up family lingers on. The wife's mother disowns the whole family and her daughter and throws them out during the heavy war period. Then the marriage of the grandparents shatters, and it's striking that the father ignores having a half-sister. The basis of this disavowal, in my opinion, is the stigma of Jews as unworthy subhuman beings. If such stigma leads to betrayal within the own family, it might result into dissolution of the family, even at the price of sacrificing family members. A deep problem, and I don't go through that. You will get these slides, but I here post why the patient has a transferred trauma. So you might read afterwards. I don't go through that. It's just to prove she has a transferred trauma, because, you know, we cannot just say she has. No, she has it. So I just rush a bit because time is running out. But constitutional shell, introversion with desires for support, great sensitivity towards exclusion and rejection, diligent, reasonable, positive, but these parameters are suitable for her grandfather's situation. And if it fails, you go into isolation, self-destruction, or sacrificing yourself or killing others. So the remedy is radium bromatum. You might not know this picture of radium bromatum, but radium bromatum, you probably know much for this rheumatic thing, and it has changing sides and rheumatic pains. And you see, radium is there in the first group where calcium and barium is, right below barium. You know, these remedies that, according to Rajan Sankaran, need support. And so there's something about radium history. I won't go with that much because lack of time. But the interesting thing is, until now in Germany, Austria, and Czechia, there are springs that have radioactive water, and you can take a radioactive bath there, which is used mainly for rheumatism, asthma, and some eruptions. And so I, being a daredevil, I went there for such a spa and had a radon bath, and because I wanted to try it out, and I wanted to know, you know, Jan Scholt was speaking about radioactive remedies, and he was saying it has to do with the high level illuminates the people that rule the world, and with concentration camps and Holocaust and the underworld. So it was like, I want to know more about it, because I had several cases with the radium brom, and I wanted to understand what this remedy is about. And so I went there to Jáchymov. Jáchymov is in Czechia, and it has a bath, and look how it looks like there. It's the Radium Palace, and this is a very famous hotel where since 100 years the Egyptian king and people like that went for treatment for their rheumatism and stuff like that. And the other side is the camp where they produced uranium for the atom bomb for Russia, in the same town. And here, in the communist time, they put the many priests and other people that were against the communist regime then to work there like in a concentration camp. And this is the famous Red Tower of Death, where the uranium got crushed and was somehow taken out of the stones, and if you worked there, your death was certain. So this in one town shows a bit the picture. If you look for radium brom mind rubrics, you see here anxiety when alone, desires light, and psychosis. I divided it a bit into the things, but I show you the syphilitic rubrics, and I dwelled always about this funny rubric: company aversion to, alternating with bursts of pleasantry and sarcasm. I never understood, what is this? What does it mean? What does it mean? And it was already there for a long time, but that time we didn't have many mind rubrics of radium brom. Nowadays we have a bit more. But then I came to the conclusion, company aversion. So the company, I don't want to have this company. But when I go into this company, then I react with bursts of pleasantry and sarcasm. Pleasantry to charm them, and sarcasm. One word about sarcasm. In India, you put sarcasm many times as irony, and not as sarcasm. Sarcasm, if we say sarcasm in Germany or in Europe, it is a harsh, biting humor. It's brutal. It's not irony that somehow avoids to be too direct. But sarcasm is very different. So we use it as that. So means the company you have must be somehow dangerous. And that now is pretty good elaborated. The delusion is a late addition into the repertory. Delusion is attacked by a family member. So if your own family attacks you, then this might create and attacks you to death. That is a situation of our radium brum. So my thesis for that is it's an existential threat from the group you belong to, especially family. Betrayal, intrigue, and treacherous attack brom topics, leading to feelings of isolation and fear of death and destruction. And the fear in the dark is and fear of ghosts might indicate invisible threats. And one patient of mine said, "My sister poisoned me with her thoughts. She was intriguing and yeah, really bad." And in syphilitic shaping, you have clairvoyant dreams, probably to sense the threat. And a lot of morbid, destructive fantasies. You know what she had with the sky cupping, and you know this kind of splatter dream, splatter film, like splatter is this chainsaw massacre. And later on, they might be fascinated by the dark and the morbid. So the thesis on the Constitution is they are introverted, diligent. Brom is active. They do things. Guilty feeling, seeking for support, self-destruction. You see chilly alternating signs. Physical entry points, I've named it here, which is not very far from the case we had. The small pain in joints, deep in, wandering, and especially alternating sides. One epilogue on the parents' emotionlessness and speechlessness are typical for the after World War II generation. The mother had a safe job, father built up a company, and so you can characterize trauma families psychologically, and one family is we made it, and so we neglect any emotion just to achieve after this heavy incidents. And so the daughter's impulse to reflect the family history was very good. Conclusion: we have to individualize the family history. We have not to ask, was there cancer, was there tuberculosis? We have to get the story. And so if you want to determine the imprint, the constitutional imprint, it is at least of help if you understand the family history. And nowadays ask always about it. Epigenetic knowledge gives us hints on sensitive stages. There will be more research done on that, but this imprint in the moment follicles or sperms are produced, that gives us hints to ask what for. And epigenetics show in which diseases we are more likely to be effective. If you have epigenetic changes, it's easier to treat than genetic changes, I guess. And that was one question already. Epigenetic factors in the change might help us to create evidence for homeopathic treatment. That was a bit fast, I think, but I managed at least half on time. So if you have some more questions, I'm happy to answer.
Yes, sir, there is one question.
Yeah.
Sir, from Uruz Fatima, she's asking, syphilitic manifestation, can our medicines provide permanent healing at mental and physical symptoms?
Once again, I understood the text, but what's the question?
For syphilitic manifestation, can our medicines provide permanent healing at mental and physical symptoms?
Yes. That's a bit surprising question. If you find the simillimum you don't hear anymore from the patients. Here in Hamburg, where I treat, it's in the center of the city. I sometimes meet my patients after 3-4 years on the street, and I ask them, "Oh, how are you? Oh, never been anything again." That's the average. You don't see that you're patients anymore. If it's good, but we all have patients that don't run well. So the challenge is always to find the minimum. And personally, I advanced a lot with these teachings of Vijayka to what is the syphilitic entry point, what is the deepest point, and how is the constitution. This relation of the hierarchy of symptoms to find the right entrance into the case, combined with the constitutional setup. This is very good. And that has cleared many things, as well as the 3 miasmatic remedy pictures. Nearly every remedy can be syphilitic. So that helps a lot to determine the right remedy. But that is always the challenge, no matter which method you use. Okay, that's so far what I can say.
Okay. Any more questions from participants?
That's it. Yeah, if you have, if you still want to go on.
Yes, sir. We are waiting for more questions if we have.
Yeah. Well, we that the time is more or less finished, isn't it?
Yes, the time is almost over.
But I'm fine for more questions if there are.
I think there's no more questions, sir.
The last bit was a bit stuffed into the mouth, eh?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I think there is no more questions.
Okay, so is it we finish?
Yeah, sir. Before finishing, sir, I would like to thank our audience and you, sir. At the end of the session, on behalf of Government Homeopathy Medical College Bhopal, I would like to thank you, sir. It's been a pleasure being with you. It's been an honor.
Thank you.
It's been an honor to be among us such lucky individual to know the roles of epigenetics in constitutional prescribing and also how to deal with the such challenges. It was fantastic to have benefited from the vast experience that you have, sir. Also, highly benefited from your case discussions.
Hopefully.
Yes, sir. There were lots of take-home messages, and I think all other participants are feeling the same. Thank you again, sir, for your time.
No problem. I enjoyed that very much, though it was very new and very exciting. But time got a bit.
Also, sir, I would like to thank all the participants for being here today.
Yeah, that is a pleasure to have such an audience. In India, you always have a big audience. In Germany, you have usually much less people. So I'm happy about that you attended this seminar. Yeah, hopefully we can. And I wish you a nice Sunday evening. Okay, so thanks a lot, and
thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Enjoy your evening, and hope to see you again. If there are any questions, reflections, you can text me.
Yeah, sure, sir.
Okay.
Thank you, sir. Bye, sir.
Bye. Bye.